I woke up that morning with a soft ache in my bones and a deeper ache in my heart. 75 years. I whispered it to myself as if saying it aloud would make it more real. 75. It sounded heavy, like a number that belonged to someone else, not me. The morning light slid gently across my room. The curtains swayed, thin and tired, carrying the faint scent of lavender that I always kept near my pillow. Outside I could hear birds, the same ones that sang every morning. But today, even they sounded distant, like their songs belonged to a world I was no longer a part of. The kettle began to whistle in the kitchen, a small sound that filled the quietness. I reached for my cup, the floral one with a tiny crack along the rim. It was a crack I had stopped noticing years ago. Much like the small cracks in my heart, I told myself it would be a good day. I even brushed my hair twice, wore my favorite cardigan, the blue one Michael had bought me long ago, back when he used to remember things like my birthday. Every year for as long as I could remember, the phone would ring. Sometimes early, sometimes late, but it always rang. Anna's laugh would fill the line, soft and clumsy. Michael would joke about how old I was getting. Even their children would shout from behind the receiver, "Happy birthday, Grandma!" But today, nothing. I looked at the phone again and again, as if staring long enough could force it to ring. I told myself they must be busy. Everyone is busy these days. Michael always said work never ends. Laura was probably hosting one of her perfect luncheons again. Anna, she lived far away now. Flights were expensive. Time even more so. Still, a mother's heart waits. By noon I had laid the table. Just one plate, a slice of bread, some jam, and the small chocolate cake I had baked the night before. It was tradition, I told myself. But it was really hope disguised as habit. I even placed 3 candles on top, small ones I found in the drawer. I thought maybe if I lit them they would appear, like children to a flame. But when the doorbell rang, it was only the mailman. He handed me a stack of envelopes, bills, advertisements, and a medical reminder I did not want to read. "Happy birthday, Mrs. Lewis," he said politely, but his eyes were already elsewhere. "Thank you," I murmured. The words felt hollow, like they were echoing in a room too large for them. I sat down again and tried to eat a bite of cake. It was too sweet, too dry, too lonely. I put the fork down and looked around the room. The clock ticking, the faded wallpaper, the smell of old wood. Everything seemed to be aging with me. I turned on the radio to fill the silence. A song from the 60s began to play, one I used to dance to with my husband, Thomas. We had been so young, so certain that time would always belong to us. But time never belongs to anyone. It just slips away quietly while we are busy remembering. I reached for an old photo album from the shelf. My trembling hands brushed over the cover, its corners soft from years of touching. The first page showed me holding Michael as a baby, his tiny fingers clutching mine, his smile wide and bright. I could almost hear his laughter again. "Where did you go, my boy?" I whispered. "Where did all of you go?" The house answered with silence. By late afternoon, the sun had turned golden. I stood by the window watching the street. Cars passed. Children played. A young couple walked hand in hand. Life kept moving, indifferent to mine. For a brief second, I imagined my children arriving. A car stopping outside, doors opening, laughter spilling out, balloons, flowers, maybe even a clumsy surprise. But the road stayed empty. I felt the tears well up, but I refused to let them fall. I told myself I was strong, that 75 years had taught me to live with disappointment. Yet the ache inside me only grew heavier. Evening came, slow and quiet. I lit a candle the way I used to during power cuts when the kids were small. Back then we would sit around the table, tell stories, make shadows on the wall. Their giggles used to fill the house. Now only my shadow moved, thin and still. I whispered softly, "Happy birthday, Margaret." It felt strange hearing my own voice say it, but someone had to remember. Then, for reasons I could not explain, I began to talk to the empty room, to Thomas, to my past, maybe to God. Was I a bad mother? I asked. Did I love them too much or too little? Or was love simply not enough to keep them near? No answer came. Only the candle's flame trembled, as if it, too, felt sorry for me. I sat there until the clock struck 10. The day was almost over. I told myself to go to bed. Maybe sleep would be kinder than memory. But just as I stood up, the phone rang. The sound startled me. My heart raced as I hurried toward it, almost tripping over the rug. My hands shook when I picked it up. "Hello?" I said quickly. Silence for a second. Then a male voice. Calm, polite. "Is this Mrs. Margaret Lewis?" "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "Who is this?" There was a pause, a faint sound of papers being moved. "Ma'am, I'm calling from Willow Creek Community Center. We found your number written inside a birthday card left in our hall. It says, 'For Margaret on her 75th birthday.'" I frowned. "I do not understand. Who left it?" "We think it was a man named Benjamin Carter." He replied, "Does that name mean anything to you?" My breath caught in my chest. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. Benjamin Carter. A name buried deep in time. A name that carried laughter, tears, and one unforgettable goodbye. I sank slowly into my chair, whispering his name as if afraid the air might take it away. Benjamin. Outside, the wind sighed against the windows, and for the first time that day, I felt something stir inside me. Not sadness, not exactly hope, but something alive. Because sometimes, when you think the world has forgotten you, life sends you a whisper from the past, reminding you that your story is not over yet. For a long time after the call ended, I just sat there, still, quiet, my fingers resting on the receiver as if afraid that letting go would break the fragile thread connecting me to that voice. Benjamin Carter. The name echoed in my head like an old melody, one I had almost forgotten but still remembered the tune of. 50 years. Had it really been that long? The room felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls were closing in, pressing the air out of my lungs. I looked at the candle on the table. Its flame was trembling, just like my hands. I had not heard that name since I was 24, back when the world was brighter, and my heart believed that love could fix everything. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. The memories came slowly, carefully, as if afraid to startle me. Benjamin was my first love. He was kind, with a quiet smile that always seemed to hide a secret joke. He had come to our town as a teacher at the local school where I worked as a librarian. I still remember the first time I saw him. He was standing near the gate, holding a bunch of papers, his tie crooked, his hair a little messy. He looked so lost, and yet so alive. He asked me for directions, but I forgot to answer for a moment because I was too busy looking at his eyes. They were warm, deep brown, like autumn leaves. And from that day, something in my life began to change. We spent countless afternoons together, walking home from work, talking about everything and nothing. He told me stories about books, about history, about dreams he had for the future. And I told him about my mother's garden, about how I wanted to see the ocean someday. He said he would take me there. But life has its own ways of breaking promises. Benjamin left one morning. No goodbye, no letter. Just gone. I waited for weeks, then months, then years. Later, I heard he had moved to another town, then joined a volunteer program overseas. And slowly I buried him deep in the corners of my heart, where lost things go. Then came Thomas, my husband. He was gentle, stable, The kind of man who built a life rather than chased one. We raised children, shared laughter, faced storms together. I loved him, in a different, quieter way. But I never forgot Benjamin. Even after all these years, his name carried a shadow of something unfinished. Now, 50 years later, that name had found its way back to me. On my 75th birthday, when everyone else had forgotten, I sat for a long time, thinking about the voice on the phone, the confusion in the young man's tone. "We found your number in a card," he had said. For Margaret, on her 75th birthday. Who would leave that? And why now? The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. The sky outside was pale and soft, like old paper. I made tea, but my hands were trembling so much that half of it spilled. I could not stop thinking about that name. I decided to call back. I searched through the list of recent calls and pressed the number. My heart thudded as it began to ring. After a few seconds, the same voice answered. "Willow Creek Community Center. How can I help you?" "This is Margaret Lewis," I said. "You called me yesterday. About a card?" "Oh yes, Mrs. Lewis," he said warmly. "I remember. You sounded surprised." "I was," I admitted. "Can I see the card?" There was a pause. "Of course. If you are able to come down to the center, we can show it to you. It was left in our donation box last week." Donation box? Something about that made my chest tighten. "I will come," I said quietly. "Thank you." After hanging up, I sat still for a moment. I could almost hear Thomas scolding me in that patient tone he always used. "You should not be wandering around alone. Margaret," he would have said. But Thomas was gone, and so were the children, gone in their own ways. So I dressed myself slowly, put on my best coat, brushed my hair twice, and stepped outside. The cold air met me like an old friend. I had forgotten what it felt like to walk somewhere with a purpose. My cane clicked softly against the pavement as I moved down the street, passing familiar houses that no longer felt familiar at all. When I reached the community center, a young man greeted me at the door. He could not have been more than 25, full of polite energy. "You must be Mrs. Lewis," he said, smiling. "Yes, dear," I replied. "You are the one who called me?" "That is right. My name is Daniel." He led me inside, through a small hallway that smelled faintly of coffee and paint. The walls were lined with bulletin boards, photos, charity notices, children's drawings. I felt out of place among all that color and life. Daniel stopped at a small desk. "This is the card," he said, handing it to me carefully. It was a simple white envelope, slightly creased. My name was written in neat handwriting on the front. Margaret Lewis. I opened it slowly. Inside was a small birthday card with faded flowers on the cover. The message inside was short. "Happy 75th birthday, Margaret. You once told me that love never really ends. It just changes shape." "You were right. Benjamin." For a long moment I could not breathe. The room seemed to fade around me. I could hear my own heartbeat, fast and uneven. Daniel's voice broke the silence. "Do you know him?" "Yes," I whispered. "A long time ago." "Would you like us to find him?" he asked. "There is no return address, but maybe we could—" I shook my head. "No, not yet. Because I did not know if I wanted to find him, or if I could survive it if I did." That night I sat by the window again. The moonlight filled the room, silver and soft. I held the card in my lap, tracing the letters of his name with my finger. Benjamin remembered me, after 50 years. But why now? I looked around my empty house. The quiet rooms, the untouched cake, the clock ticking in the corner. Maybe life had waited for the right moment. Maybe this was not coincidence, but something deeper. I thought of my children again. Michael had not called, not even sent a message. Anna had not written either. I reached for my phone, scrolled through old photos. There was one from last Christmas. Me sitting on the couch, smiling as Michael's children opened presents. I remembered that day clearly. They had come late, stayed for barely an hour, and left early for other plans. I remembered standing at the door, waving as their car disappeared down the street. Anna had promised to visit in the spring. She never did. Family. It is such a beautiful word, but it can become so hollow. I kept telling myself that they loved me, that their silence did not mean absence, that their distance did not mean neglect. But deep down I knew the truth. I had become a memory in their lives, forgotten, like an old book on a dusty shelf. Yet somehow, this stranger, this man from my past, still remembered me enough to send a message across time. The next day, I went back to the community center. Daniel was surprised to see me. "I was hoping," I said, "that maybe you could tell me who dropped the card off." He nodded. "We checked the cameras after you left. It was an older man, maybe around 70, with a walking stick. He left it at the front desk. Did not say much. We thought he was just making a donation." My breath caught. "Did he say where he was going?" Daniel shook his head. "No, but he looked emotional. I remember because he stood by the door for a while before leaving. Like he was saying goodbye to something." "Can I see the footage?" I asked. Daniel smiled kindly. "I am not supposed to, but yes, I can show you." He played the video on a small monitor. The image was grainy, but when I saw him, my heart stopped. There he was. Benjamin. Older, thinner, his hair silver, but it was him. The way he held his hat, the way he looked at the envelope before walking away. Tears filled my eyes. He had come. After 50 years he had come, and I had not even known. "Do you want me to find him?" Daniel asked softly. I wiped my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "Please find him." He nodded. "I will try my best." That night I could not sleep. I sat by the candle again, the same one from my birthday. The flame flickered, and I realized, for the first time in years, that I did not feel entirely alone. Maybe, just maybe, life had given me one more chance to understand what love really meant. Because even if time steals faces, memories, and moments, it cannot take away what the heart remembers. And mine, it seemed, had been waiting for this all along. When I opened my eyes the next morning, the sunlight felt softer than usual. It rested gently on my face, like it was reminding me that even after everything, the world hadn't ended. But inside it still felt like something I couldn't quite name. The phone call from Clara had stayed in my mind all night. I kept replaying her voice, warm, curious, and full of a kindness that didn't feel forced. She said she wanted to meet me, and though part of me was afraid, another part whispered that maybe, just maybe, I should. I hadn't had anyone want to see me in a very long time. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the small window overlooking the empty street, and watched the world wake up. The milkman, the young couple arguing by their car, the boy walking his dog, all of them part of a world that kept moving while mine stood still. After finishing my tea, I took out an old photo album. The edges were worn and frayed, the leather peeling from years of use. I flipped through pages filled with birthdays, picnics, Christmas mornings, frozen moments of laughter that once felt endless. And then I stopped at one picture. My 60th birthday. Everyone was there. My son Mark, his wife, their 2 kids. My late husband Robert standing behind me, one hand on my shoulder. The cake had "To Mom with Love" written in messy icing. I touched the photo gently. "You promised we'd always stay close," I whispered to Robert's face in the picture. "But look where we are now." I knew I couldn't spend the rest of my days waiting for calls that would never come. So when Clara called again that afternoon, I answered. "Hello, dear," she said cheerfully. "I was hoping you'd say yes. I made you a pie. Apple cinnamon. I used to bake it for my mother when she was your age." Her words felt like sunlight through the window. Gentle and unexpected. "That sounds lovely," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. "When would you like me to come?" "Oh, no," she laughed softly. "I'll come to you. I think you've done enough waiting." And just like that, Clara came into my life. A stranger who didn't ask for anything, who didn't talk about what she needed, but asked instead what I wanted. It felt new, strange, good. When she arrived, she carried a pie in one hand and a bunch of flowers in the other. Her smile was wide, the kind that lights up a room without trying. She wasn't young, maybe in her early 40s, with lines near her eyes that showed a life lived fully. Not perfectly. "But honestly, I hope I'm not too early," she said as she stepped in. "Not at all," I replied. "You're the first guest I've had in months." Her expression softened. "Then I'm honored. We talked for hours that day. About life, about regrets, about how loneliness feels heavier when it's quiet. She listened. Really listened. Not like people who just nod while waiting to speak. She asked questions that made me remember who I used to be. The woman who loved to paint, who volunteered at the library, who once believed birthdays were meant to be celebrated, not survived. Before she left, Clara looked around the house and said, "You know, this place deserves laughter again," I smiled weakly. "It's been a long time since it heard any." "Well," she said, "then we'll fix that." The next few weeks passed differently. She called often, sometimes just to share a funny story, sometimes to check if I had eaten. Once she even brought her daughter, Emma, to meet me. A shy little girl with curly hair and a love for drawing. She reminded me of my own granddaughter, Sophie, who hadn't visited in 3 years. Every time Emma came, she left one of her drawings on my fridge. Soon the fridge was covered with colors. Pink suns, blue cats, and smiling stick figures holding hands. It looked alive again. But one evening, something unexpected happened. Mark called. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. His name glowing on the phone screen after so many months. Felt unreal. I picked up quickly, my hands trembling. "Mom," he said. His voice was flat, like he was reading from a script. "I heard you've been talking to some woman." "Clara?" I hesitated. "Yes, she's been visiting. She's kind." "I don't think that's a good idea," he said. "You don't know her. She could be taking advantage of you." His words hit me hard. "Taking advantage? Mark, she's the only one who's been kind to me in months." He sighed as if I was the child. "I'm just saying, be careful. You're getting old, Mom. You can't always tell people's intentions." I felt a sting in my chest. "Old," I repeated. "You say it like it's a weakness." "I didn't mean—" he started, but I cut him off. "Yes, you did. You all forgot me on my birthday, Mark. Not one of you called. But now that someone shows me kindness, suddenly you remember I exist." He stayed silent for a moment. "I'll call you later," he muttered and hung up. That night I sat in the living room, staring at the silent phone. I wanted to cry, but instead I smiled, because for the first time in years, I had found something real. A connection that wasn't built out of guilt or obligation. It was built out of choice. A week later, Clara invited me to her home. "It's not fancy," she warned, "but it has heart." When I walked in, I understood what she meant. There were old photos on the wall, the smell of cinnamon in the air, and a warmth that felt like belonging. Her husband, Tom, greeted me kindly, and Emma ran up to show me her new drawing. It was of the two of us sitting on a bench holding hands. "See?" Emma said proudly. "That's you! I made your hair silver because Mom said silver means strong." I laughed softly. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time." Clara smiled. "It's true, you know. You're stronger than you realize." That night, as I returned home, I felt something shift inside me. It was small but real, like a window opening after years of being shut. Maybe life wasn't over yet. Maybe there was still time for new beginnings, even at 75. And as I locked the door, I whispered to myself, maybe this was the gift I was meant to receive. Not from my family, but from fate itself. I woke up the next morning to the sound of rain tapping against my window. It was one of those soft, patient rains that didn't rush. The kind that seemed to understand silence. I made myself tea, sat in my armchair, and watched the water race down the glass. The world looked blurred, washed clean. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I thought of Clara, the way she smiled when she entered my house, the warmth she brought with her laughter, the way she filled every corner of the room with ease. Like she'd been here before, like she belonged. But something inside me, quiet yet firm, whispered that there was more to her than what she let me see. That thought stayed in the back of my mind, gentle but persistent. A few days later, she called again. "Good morning, lovely lady," she said in her bright voice. "I made soup today. It's raining and no one should eat alone on a rainy day." I smiled despite myself. "You're going to spoil me." "Well," she laughed, "someone should." When she arrived, she carried a pot of steaming soup and a bag of homemade bread. We ate together, talked about books, and even played a small game of cards. I hadn't done that in years. Not since Robert passed away. But as we played, I noticed something. The way she looked around the room. Not with curiosity, but with recognition. Her eyes paused on a framed photograph of my husband in his younger days. Her expression changed, just for a second. Sadness, maybe. Or something deeper. "Do you know him?" I asked softly. She blinked, startled. "Who?" "Robert," I said. "My husband. He passed away 8 years ago." She stared at the photo again. "No," she said too quickly. "I don't." I smiled faintly, pretending not to notice her hesitation. "You look like you did?" Clara smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "He reminds me of someone. That's all." And just like that, she changed the subject. The following week, something strange happened. I received a letter, an actual handwritten letter, rare these days. The envelope had no return address. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Inside, a single line was written. "Be careful who you let in, Margaret. Not everyone is who they seem." My hands shook as I read it. There was no signature, no clue who sent it. For a moment, I considered calling Mark. But then I stopped myself. He'd just say I was being paranoid. He'd remind me that I was too old to handle things on my own. So I tucked the letter away in a drawer and told myself it was nothing. Maybe a mistake. Maybe meant for someone else. But that night, sleep refused to come. My mind kept circling back to Clara's expression when she saw Robert's picture. The letter, the timing. Something didn't fit. The next day, Clara came again, this time with a stack of old magazines and a bunch of daisies. "You've been quiet lately," she said, placing the flowers in a vase. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated. "Do you believe in coincidences, Clara?" She tilted her head. "Sometimes. Why do you ask?" "I received a letter," I said slowly. "Anonymous. It said, 'Not everyone is who they seem.'" Her eyes widened. "That's strange. Do you think it's a prank?" "I don't know," I whispered. "But I can't stop thinking about it." Clara reached across the table, placed her hand over mine. Her skin was warm, her touch steady. "People can be cruel," she said softly. "They see someone alone, and they like to scare them. Don't let them." Her words were comforting, too comforting. They wrapped around me like a blanket, and yet, deep inside, that quiet voice still whispered, "Something isn't right." A few days later, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. Visit the town library. It was raining again, and as I walked through the narrow aisles lined with dusty books, I felt like I had stepped back into another life. The librarian, an old friend named Martha, smiled when she saw me. "Well, if it isn't Margaret Shaw," she said. "Haven't seen you in ages." "I needed a little change of scenery," I said. We talked for a while, and then, as I was about to leave, she said, "Oh, by the way, that young lady who visits you sometimes. Clara, right? She came by here last week. Lovely woman." I froze. "She did?" "Yes," Martha said. "She was looking for some old newspaper archives. Said she was researching local history. Something about a man named Robert Shaw." My heart dropped. Robert Shaw, my husband. I felt my knees weaken. "Did she say why?" "No," Martha said, frowning slightly. "But she looked quite emotional about it." I forced a smile, thanked her, and walked out, my hands shaking, my breath shallow. By the time I got home, my mind was racing. Why would Clara be researching Robert? Why pretend she didn't know him? That night I sat alone in the dark, staring at the photograph on my wall. Robert's gentle smile seemed to hold secrets I had never known. The next morning Clara came again, cheerful as always. "I brought croissants," she said, holding up a bag. But I couldn't pretend anymore. "Why were you looking up my husband's name?" I asked quietly. She froze mid-step. "What?" Martha told me. "At the library." My voice trembled, but I held her gaze. "You said you didn't know him, Clara. Why lie?" For a moment she didn't speak. The silence between us stretched thin, sharp as glass. Then she sighed. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said softly. "I didn't want to upset you." "Tell me what?" She placed the bag down, her eyes glistening. "Robert helped my mother once, years ago. She was in a car accident. He stopped and saved her life. She told me his name right before she passed away last year." My breath caught. "Your mother?" "Yes," she said, tears filling her eyes. "Her name was Eleanor. She said if she ever found a way to thank the man who saved her, she would. After she died, I looked up his name. That's when I found you." My eyes filled with tears. "All this time, you came to thank him?" Clara nodded. "And you, because you were part of the kindness he gave her. I just didn't know how to explain it without sounding strange." The room fell silent. Outside, the rain had stopped, and sunlight filtered through the window like forgiveness. I felt my heart soften. After a long pause, I said quietly, "You didn't need to lie, Clara, but thank you for keeping his memory alive." She reached for my hand again. "You deserve to be remembered too, Margaret." Over the next few days, things felt different, lighter somehow. I believed her story, at least most of it, but a small shadow still lingered inside me. And then, one afternoon, while cleaning the living room, I found something that changed everything. It was a small folder tucked under the couch cushion. It wasn't mine. Inside were printed pages, old newspaper clippings, and a handwritten note that said, "Robert Shaw, Inheritance Transfer, 2017. My blood ran cold. I skimmed through the papers. They were about the sale of Robert's company after his death, a company that Mark had managed afterward. The documents mentioned a dispute over ownership, and another name appeared at the bottom, Clara Weston. I sat down hard. My hands were trembling. Clara wasn't just connected to my husband's past. She was connected to his business. Why hadn't she told me that? That evening when Clara came by, I confronted her again. This time with the folder in my hand. "I found this," I said quietly. "You said you came here because of my husband's kindness, but you were involved in his company. Why hide that?" Clara looked down, her face pale. "I wasn't going to take anything from you," she said quickly. "I swear it. My mother was one of the employees who lost their pensions when the company changed hands. She died believing it was all gone. I wanted to understand what happened. Not for revenge, but for closure." My throat tightened. "So all this time you were investigating?" Tears rolled down her cheeks. "At first, yes. But then I met you, and it stopped being about the past. You reminded me of my mother. I didn't want to hurt you. I wanted to be angry, to shout, to cry, to throw her out. But instead I just felt tired. So very tired. Clara," I whispered, "you should have told me. I could have helped you." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry." That night after she left, I sat alone in silence. The house felt heavy again, but not in the same way as before. Because this time, I wasn't just lonely. I was awake. I saw how fragile connections can be, how easily kindness and secrets can mix, how even good intentions can turn into wounds. But I also knew one thing for sure. Even though Clara had lied, she had also saved me. Not from danger, but from disappearing completely. As I turned off the lights, I whispered to the empty room, "Maybe life isn't about who stays true. Maybe it's about who makes you feel alive, even for a while." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel forgotten. The next morning, the house felt colder than usual. Not because of the weather, but because silence had weight again. Clara didn't come that day, and though a part of me was relieved, another part missed her. It's strange, isn't it? How someone can walk into your life uninvited, stir everything up, and then leave a space so loud that it hurts when they're gone. I made myself tea and sat by the window, watching the leaves fall from the old oak tree in the yard. Autumn had arrived, quiet, golden, and full of endings. I thought of Robert, of the years we shared, the laughter, the arguments, the promises we both kept and broke. I thought of my son Mark, and how distance between a parent and child grows like ivy, slow, silent but stubborn. And then I thought of Clara, the woman who had appeared on my 75th birthday, uninvited but needed, with secrets that had somehow woken up my past. There were still too many questions, too many things unsaid. So that day, I decided to find the truth, once and for all. I went up to the attic. It had been years since I'd climbed those creaky stairs. The air smelled of dust and old wood, and sunlight broke through tiny cracks in the roof, falling across stacks of boxes and forgotten memories. I pulled the chain to turn on the single bulb that still hung from the ceiling. Its light flickered uncertainly, as if unsure whether it wanted to reveal what was hidden here. There were boxes labeled Christmas, Mark's school papers, Robert's office files, and then I saw one that caught my eye. A small brown trunk with a lock half broken, and a faded tag that simply said, RS, Personal. I sat down slowly, my heart beating faster than it should have. The trunk creaked as I opened it. Inside were letters, old receipts, and photographs. Some I had never seen before. Among them was a large envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with red wax. My name was written on it in Robert's handwriting. My breath caught. It was dated April 2017, the week before he died. I held the letter with trembling hands, afraid of what it might say, but knowing I couldn't turn away now. I broke the seal, unfolded the paper, and began to read. My dearest Margaret, If you're reading this, it means I've gone before you. And there are things you must know. Things I couldn't tell you when I was alive. I made mistakes, Maggie. I thought I was protecting you by keeping certain truths hidden. But now I see that silence can wound more deeply than words ever could. Years ago, I started a second company, under a different name. It was meant to secure our future, but I let others manage it. People I thought I could trust. One of them was a woman named Eleanor Weston. She was bright, loyal, and far too kind. But the business turned dark when my partner betrayed us both. Eleanor lost everything. I tried to make it right, but she refused my money. She said all she wanted was for me to promise that someday I'd make sure her daughter would never suffer the same way she did. Her daughter's name was Clara. If she ever finds you, don't push her away. She deserves peace, even if I couldn't give it to her mother. And Margaret. I know I wasn't always the husband you deserved. I hid behind work when I should have held you. But know this. You were my home, always. I love you beyond the noise of life, beyond regret. Yours always, Robert. I read the letter twice, maybe 3 times, before the tears came. Silent at first, then harder, until they blurred the words on the page. All this time, Clara hadn't been lying. Not completely. She had come because of a promise. A promise my husband had made before he died. But he hadn't just left her closure. He had left me a truth that changed everything I thought I knew. About him. About us. I sat there in the attic for what felt like hours. Memories came rushing back. The late nights Robert spent at his desk. The phone calls he never explained. The guilt I sometimes saw in his eyes but never questioned. I thought I knew him completely. I thought our story had already ended. But now, I realized, I had only read half of it. When I finally came downstairs, the sun had started to set. The house was bathed in soft orange light. I placed Robert's letter on the table and made myself another cup of tea. His favorite kind, with a slice of lemon. Then I picked up the phone and dialed Clara's number. She answered after a few rings, her voice cautious. "Margaret." "Yes," I said quietly. "I found something. A letter from Robert." There was silence on the other end. "Oh, he mentioned you," I continued. "And your mother." Her breath caught. "He did?" "Yes," I said softly. "He made a promise. To look after you somehow. I think that's why you were meant to find me." I heard her sniffle. "I didn't expect that. I thought maybe he'd forgotten us." I smiled faintly. He didn't forget. He just waited for the right moment. Maybe this was it. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, in a trembling voice, she whispered, "Can I come over?" "Yes," I said. "Come." When Clara arrived, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the letter spread before me. She walked in quietly, her eyes red, her face pale. I handed her the paper. She took it with shaking hands and began to read. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "He remembered my mother," she said softly. "After all those years." I nodded. "He didn't just remember. He cared." She looked up at me. "You must hate me for lying." I took a deep breath. "I did," I admitted, for a moment. "But now I understand. You were searching for the truth. Just like I was." Clara covered her face with her hands and began to cry. Not loud, but the kind of cry that comes from years of holding things inside. I reached out and held her hand. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." We sat together for a long time in silence. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Later, she helped me prepare dinner. We laughed a little. Awkward at first, then easier. It was strange how forgiveness could feel like breathing again after holding your breath for too long. As we ate, she said, "Maybe this was how it was supposed to happen. You and I meeting like this. Your husband's promise, my mother's wish." I smiled. Maybe some promises don't end with death. Maybe they just wait for the right people to find them again. That night after she left, I went back to the attic one last time. I placed Robert's letter back in the trunk, but this time I added something beside it. A note of my own. To whoever finds this someday, know that life doesn't end when people leave. It continues, in unexpected kindness, in strangers who become family, in the hearts that choose to forgive. If you ever feel forgotten, remember, sometimes the universe sends someone to remind you that you still matter. Margaret Shaw. I closed the trunk and smiled through my tears. For the first time since my 75th birthday, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of echoes, of voices, of love that refused to die. Weeks passed. Clara and I continued to see each other. Sometimes she brought Emma, and the little girl filled my home with laughter again. Mark called occasionally too. Maybe guilt, maybe something softer. But I answered, and that was enough. On a Sunday afternoon, I sat in the garden with Clara. The sun was warm, the breeze gentle. "You know," she said, "I think your husband would be proud of you." I smiled. "I think he'd be proud of you too." She laughed lightly. "We've both come a long way, haven't we?" "Yes," I said, looking at the sky. "And maybe this, all of this, was my real birthday gift." That night, as I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The same old wrinkles, the same silver hair. But the woman looking back wasn't lonely anymore. She had lived through loss, through betrayal, through silence, and found her way back to love in a form she never expected. Before turning off the light, I whispered softly, "Thank you, Robert, and thank you, Clara, for reminding me that I was never forgotten." Epilogue. Months later, Clara found a way to restore her mother's lost pension. Not through revenge, but through truth. She named the charity she built afterward Second Promises, to help elderly people reconnect with family and hope. She insisted I be part of it. I became the one who answered letters from people who felt invisible, who thought life had passed them by. Each time I wrote back, I ended my letter the same way. "You're never too old to begin again." Sometimes the next chapter comes when you stop waiting and start listening to the knock on your door. And that's how A Stranger's Call on my 75th birthday turned into the most meaningful chapter of my life. Not an ending, but a beginning. Born from forgotten candles, a silent house, and a promise that refused to die. I never thought peace could feel this quiet. For so many years I had associated silence with loneliness. The sound of my own breath in an empty room. The ticking clock echoing through walls that had forgotten laughter. But now, silence felt different. It was calm. It was kind. It was mine. After that call from Claire, my world began to shift. Not suddenly, not with grand gestures, but like the slow melting of snow under the first touch of spring. She called me every morning after that day. At first, it felt strange to receive calls that were not requests, reminders, or forgotten apologies. Claire never asked for anything. She only asked how I was feeling. Sometimes we talked for hours. About her garden, her late husband, the silly way her cat would steal socks from guests. Other days we simply sat on the line in silence. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words. One day, she said softly, "Mary, why don't you come visit me this weekend? It's my birthday too." That made me laugh. I hadn't celebrated anyone's birthday in years. I hesitated at first. The thought of leaving my house felt foreign, like I'd forgotten how to exist in the outside world. But she insisted gently, and there was something in her voice that reminded me of the woman I used to be. Strong, lively, curious. So I went. Claire lived in a small cottage by the coast, where the sea wind carried the scent of salt and lavender. When I arrived, she greeted me with open arms. No hesitation, no pity, no judgment. She simply said, "Welcome home, Mary." And somehow, I believed her. That weekend changed something inside me. We cooked together, laughed like schoolgirls, and shared stories of our younger days. Tales of love, loss, and the strange way time steals everything and gives it back in memories. It was as if life had given me another chance. Not to rewrite my past, but to start a softer ending. Weeks turned into months, and the loneliness that once consumed me began to fade like mist in sunlight. Claire and I became inseparable, two women in their 70s, living proof that friendship can bloom even in the last chapters of life. We walked along the beach every morning, the waves brushing our feet like whispers of the years we had lost. We spoke about our families, not with bitterness, but with quiet understanding. One morning, while we were sipping tea by the window, Claire looked at me with those wise, gentle eyes. "You know, Mary," she said, "forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about not letting pain have the last word." Those words stayed with me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my family, about how I had spent years loving them in silence, expecting something in return. But maybe love wasn't meant to be a transaction. Maybe it was enough to love, even when you are forgotten. So I picked up the phone. For the first time in months, I called my son. He didn't answer. I wasn't surprised. But I left a message anyway. My voice trembled, but my heart was steady. "Hi, Daniel. It's Mom. I just wanted to say that I hope you're well. I'm okay now. Better than before. And I just wanted you to know I forgive you. I love you. I didn't expect anything, and maybe that was the most peaceful moment of my life, realizing that I didn't need anything anymore." A week later, there was a letter in my mailbox. It was from Daniel. The handwriting was shaky, uncertain, but familiar. "Mom, I heard your message. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed to hear your voice. I've been a fool, chasing everything that never mattered. If you'll let me, I'd like to see you. Your son, Daniel." I cried for a long time that day. Not the kind of tears that burn, but the kind that cleanse. When I showed the letter to Claire, she smiled and said, "Looks like life isn't done with you yet." And she was right. Daniel came to visit a few weeks later. He looked older, thinner. His eyes carried guilt, and his hands trembled when he hugged me. For a moment it felt like time had reversed. Like he was that little boy again, hiding behind me after breaking a vase. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything." I looked at him, and for the first time in decades, I felt no anger, no disappointment, only love. "It's all right, Daniel," I whispered. We both lost our way for a while, but we found it again. We spent that afternoon walking by the sea, where the horizon melted into gold. He told me about his life, his mistakes, his regrets, his hopes. And I listened, not as a mother waiting for an apology, but as a friend hearing another soul heal. That night after he left, I stood by the window watching the stars. The wind carried the soft sound of waves, and I thought of how everything had come full circle, from loneliness to connection, from silence to peace. Sometimes life takes everything from you, just so you can rediscover what truly matters. And on my 75th birthday, when I thought my story was over, life wrote me a new chapter. The morning light feels different these days. It no longer slips through the curtains like a stranger intruding on my solitude. Now, it enters softly, like an old friend who knows my secrets, but chooses only to bring warmth. It has been almost a year since that phone call, the one that changed everything, a single voice on a lonely birthday. And now, my world looks nothing like it did before. Every morning I wake to the scent of fresh tea and the sound of seagulls outside my little window. Sometimes Claire stays with me for a few days, and we share breakfast like sisters, teasing each other about our slow steps, our failing eyesight, our stubborn hearts. Other mornings it is just me, and even then I don't feel alone anymore. Because now, silence is not empty. It's full of memories, forgiveness, and a gentle kind of love that asks for nothing in return. A few weeks ago, Daniel brought his daughter, my granddaughter, to visit. Her name is Lily. She has my eyes. She ran into my house with a smile wide enough to light every corner that had once known darkness. "Grandma, Daddy says you make the best lemon cake." I laughed, my heart swelling with something I hadn't felt in years. Joy that didn't hurt. We baked together that afternoon, flour everywhere, her giggles echoing through the kitchen. It felt like the walls themselves were breathing again. At one point, she looked up at me and said, "Grandma, Daddy says he's sorry. Did he make you sad?" Her innocence broke me a little, but it also healed me. I smiled, wiped my hands, and whispered, "He did once, but he made it right again. That's what matters." She nodded seriously, then returned to her cake as if the world had just been fixed by a spoonful of sugar. And maybe, in her own way, it had. After they left that evening, I sat by the window again. The same window where I had once waited for phone calls that never came. Only this time, I didn't wait. I simply watched the sky fade into gold and pink, and I whispered a quiet, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, but to life itself, because I finally understood something. The years that felt stolen weren't truly lost. They had simply been waiting for me to grow strong enough to cherish what was still left. Claire once said, "We spend so much time mourning what's gone, that we forget to notice what stayed." I used to think she was talking about family. Now I realize that she meant everything. Time, breath, the rhythm of waves against the shore, the warmth of a kind word from a stranger. I've started keeping a small notebook beside my bed, a habit Claire encouraged. Every night before I sleep, I write 3 things I'm grateful for. Some nights it's simple: tea, laughter, the sound of rain. Other nights, it's deeper: forgiveness, peace, the courage to begin again. It's funny how a lifetime of pain can fade under the quiet strength of gratitude. Last week, Daniel asked me something unexpected. "Mom," he said, "would you come live with us? Lily wants you close." For a long time I thought I'd say no. I was afraid of losing the independence I had fought so hard to rebuild. But then I saw his eyes, the same eyes that once looked at me with shame, now filled with sincerity. And I realized this wasn't about going back. It was about moving forward, together. So I said yes. We've decided I'll spend half the year with them, and half here by the sea. A balance between the life I've learned to love alone and the family I've learned to love again. On my 76th birthday, they threw me a little celebration in the garden. Claire was there too, holding a bouquet of daisies and laughing louder than anyone. Daniel grilled fish, badly, as always, and Lily sang a song she made up on the spot. At one point, I stood back and looked at them. My family, my friend, my life, And I realized how far I had come from that night when the phone didn't ring, when I thought I had been forgotten forever. Maybe being forgotten was the beginning I needed, the silence that made space for something new. When the sun began to set, I made a small toast. My voice trembled, but my heart was steady. To love, the kind that returns when you least expect it. To friends who arrive as strangers and stay as family. And to life, for always finding a way to surprise us, even when we think the story is over. Everyone clapped, but in the middle of all the laughter, I caught Claire's eye. She smiled, and for a brief moment, I saw the same light in her that had once pulled me out of the dark. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone under the stars. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of sea salt and fresh flowers. I looked up and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be found." Because that's what this journey had truly been. Not about being remembered, but about being found again, by others and by myself. And as I closed my eyes, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A deep, unshakable peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because, for the first time in a lifetime, everything was enough.